Welcome to Godless and Grounded.
When you spend your whole life looking at the world through a single lens, you don't realize how much of the periphery you're missing. For a long time, my world was defined by a creator, a plan, and a very specific set of rules. Leaving that behind wasn't an act of rebellion or a desire to live without a moral compass. It was a slow, sometimes painful realization that the stories I was told to explain reality didn't actually match the reality I was living in. One of the first things that starts to crumble is the idea of divine design. We're often told that the universe is so perfectly fine-tuned for life that it must have a designer. But when you really look at the biology of being human, it feels less like a masterpiece and more like a series of survival hacks. Take the human eye, for example. It's amazing, sure, but the nerves are literally wired backward, creating a blind spot that our brains have to work around. Or think about the laryngeal nerve in a giraffe. It travels all the way down its long neck and back up again just to connect 2 points a few inches apart. That's not the work of a master engineer. That's the work of evolution, which can only build on what's already there. Realizing that we are a beautiful, chaotic accident of nature actually makes us more special, not less. We weren't placed here by a hand from above. We climbed our way here through billions of years of resilience. Then there is the history of the texts themselves. Most people are taught that their holy books are timeless and unchanging. But when you dig into the history, you see the fingerprints of men everywhere. You see how different cultures merged their local myths into what eventually became organized religion. The Great Flood story in the Bible is almost a beat-for-beat retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written much earlier. When you realize that religious texts are actually historical snapshots of what people believed and feared thousands of years ago, the divine authority starts to fade. They are human books, filled with human prejudices and human hopes. Understanding this doesn't mean the books are worthless, but it does mean they aren't the ultimate truth. One of the most difficult hurdles to clear is the problem of suffering. We are told there is a being who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving. But any glance at a pediatric oncology ward or a natural disaster makes that impossible to square. If a person saw a child in danger and had the power to stop it but chose not to, we would call that person a monster. Yet, when a deity does the same, we are told his ways are mysterious. At some point, the mystery excuse stops being enough. It is much more honest and much more compassionate to accept that suffering happens because the universe is indifferent, not because it's part of a grand test. When we stop waiting for a God to fix things, we realize that the responsibility to help each other is entirely on our shoulders. That is where true empathy begins. Logically, the concept of a God often raises more questions than it answers. If everything needs a creator, then who created the creator? If the creator doesn't need a creator, then why does the universe need one? By adding a deity into the equation, you aren't simplifying the origin of existence. You're just adding a massive, invisible variable that can't be tested. Scientists don't have all the answers about how the Big Bang started, and that's okay. Saying, "I don't know," is a much more honest and productive starting point than making up an answer that requires you to stop asking questions. Think about the sheer number of religions that have existed throughout history. Thousands of gods have been worshipped, and most people today dismiss 99% of them as mythology. An atheist just goes one god further. If you were born in ancient Greece, you'd be certain Zeus was real. If you were born in a different part of the world today, your one true faith would be completely different. Geography is the biggest predictor of what someone believes, which suggests that religion is a cultural inheritance, rather than a universal truth revealed to everyone. Leaving faith behind often feels like losing a safety net, but it's actually more like finally seeing the ground beneath your feet. People worry that without a God, life has no meaning. But meaning isn't something you find under a rock or receive from a higher power. Meaning is something you create. When you realize this is the only life you are guaranteed to have, every moment becomes infinitely more valuable. You don't do good things to avoid a punishment or earn a reward in an afterlife. You do them because you care about the people around you right now. Religion often claims a monopoly on morality, but we see moral behavior in the animal kingdom all the time. Chimpanzees and elephants show empathy, fairness, and grief. Morality is a survival trait. We evolved to work together because those who helped their tribe survived longer than those who didn't. We don't need a list of commandments to know that hurting others is wrong. We have a built-in capacity for connection that exists independently of any church or temple. As I moved further away from the need for a savior, I found something better, a sense of self-reliance. When things go wrong, I don't pray for a miracle. I look for a solution. When things go right, I don't give the credit to an invisible force. I acknowledge my own hard work and the support of the people in my life. This isn't about ego. It's about taking ownership of your own story. The transition is hard because religion is designed to be sticky. It uses fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of being alone. But once you realize that those fears are tools of control, they lose their power over you. You start to see the world as it is, in all its messy, complicated, and breathtaking beauty. You see that the stars aren't lights put there for us, but massive engines of fusion that created the very atoms in our bodies. We are literally made of star stuff. To me, that is more poetic and more inspiring than any creation myth I was ever told. Finding yourself means deciding what your values are without being told. It means being okay with uncertainty. It means looking at the vastness of the cosmos and feeling a sense of wonder that doesn't require a worship service. It's about realizing that you are the captain of your own soul, and the horizon is much wider than you ever imagined. Continuing where we left off, let's talk about the psychological shift that happens when you stop viewing yourself as a sinner. In many religious frameworks, you are born with a debt you can never pay. You are told you are fundamentally flawed and need an external force to make you whole. That is a heavy burden to carry. When you leave that behind, you realize that you aren't broken. You are a biological being with instincts, flaws, and potential, but none of it is evil. Mistakes become learning opportunities rather than marks on a spiritual permanent record. This shift allows for genuine self-forgiveness. You stop beating yourself up for being human and start focusing on how to be a better version of yourself for the sake of the people you love. The idea of the afterlife is another major piece of the puzzle. It's often used as a way to avoid the reality of death, but it also devalues the reality of life. If this life is just a waiting room for an eternal paradise, then the problems of this world seem less urgent. When you accept that this life is likely all there is, you become much more invested in making this world a better place. You realize that justice isn't something that happens after we die. It's something we have to fight for right here. The finality of death makes your relationships more precious. Every "I love you" and every shared sunset matters more because they aren't going to go on forever. We also have to look at the way religion handles doubt. In many circles, doubt is seen as a weakness or a temptation. But in science and philosophy, doubt is a tool. It's how we filter out bad ideas. If a belief system is true, it should be able to withstand any amount of questioning. If you're told not to look behind the curtain, it's usually because there's nothing there. Embracing your questions isn't a betrayal of truth, it's a pursuit of it. Historically, whenever humans didn't understand something like lightning, infectious diseases, or the movement of the planets, they attributed it to a god. As our understanding of the natural world grew, the gaps where gods could hide became smaller and smaller. We don't need a storm god because we understand atmospheric pressure. We don't need a plague god because we understand germs. If we keep using a deity to explain what we don't yet understand, we're just betting on our own temporary ignorance. There's also the question of free will. If there is a being who knows everything you will ever do before you do it, and who created the conditions of your life, then do you actually have a choice? The traditional concept of an all-knowing God is fundamentally incompatible with the idea of human freedom. By stepping away from that, you reclaim your agency. You are the one making the choices, and while you are influenced by your biology and your environment, you aren't a puppet in a pre-written play. Real-life examples of religious influence often show a pattern of tribalism. Religion frequently draws a line between us and them. While it can create a strong sense of community for those inside the circle, it often leads to prejudice or conflict with those outside of it. When you leave that structure, your circle expands. You start to see humanity as one big, messy family, rather than a collection of saved and lost souls. You can find common ground with anyone based on shared human experiences rather than shared dogma. Many people fear that leaving religion means losing their community. And it's true, the social aspect is hard to replace. But secular communities are growing everywhere, groups centered around hobbies, volunteering, science, and shared values. These connections are often deeper because they aren't based on an agreement to believe in the unbelievable. They're based on genuine mutual interest and support. One of the most liberating aspects of this journey is the realization that curiosity is no longer a liability. In many religious environments, asking why too many times is seen as a sign of a hardened heart or a lack of faith. You are encouraged to stay within the boundaries of a specific tradition. But once those boundaries are gone, the entire library of human knowledge opens up. You can study the cosmos, the depths of the ocean, and the complexities of the human brain without worrying if the facts will contradict a sacred story. The world becomes your classroom, and every piece of new information is a victory rather than a threat. This intellectual freedom is a fundamental part of finding yourself because it allows your mind to go wherever the evidence leads. You also start to notice how much of our moral progress as a species has actually happened in spite of religious texts rather than because of them. If we look at history, things like the abolition of slavery, the fight for women's rights, and the advancement of scientific medicine were often slowed down by people using holy books to defend the status quo. It was human reason and the growing recognition of universal human rights that moved us forward. When you step away from the idea that morality is fixed in an ancient book, you realize that we are allowed to outgrow the prejudices of the past. We can be better than the characters in those stories, and we can build a society based on understanding and empathy. There is also a profound sense of peace that comes from dropping the mental gymnastics required to defend impossible ideas. Many people spend years trying to explain why a loving God allows natural disasters or why different parts of a holy book contradict each other. That constant effort to make the pieces fit creates a lot of internal stress. When you simply accept that these stories are human inventions, the stress disappears. You don't have to defend the indefensible anymore. You can just look at a storm and see weather patterns, or look at history and see the struggle of power and culture. Reality becomes much simpler and more coherent when you don't have to filter it through a supernatural lens. We should also talk about the power of the here and now. Religion often focuses so much on a future state, heaven, hell, or reincarnation, that it can make the present moment feel like a secondary concern. But when you find yourself outside of that belief, you realize that the present is all we really have. The urgency of the human condition becomes a call to action. Another real-life fact to consider is the way our brains are wired for patterns and stories. Humans naturally want to see a who behind every what. This is an evolutionary leftover from when we needed to wonder if the rustle in the grass was a predator or just the wind. It was safer to assume it was a who. This same instinct makes us want to see a creator behind the universe. But just because we feel like there's a designer doesn't mean there is one. Recognizing our own cognitive biases is a huge step in finding ourselves. It allows us to distinguish between our internal feelings and the external facts of the world. The sense of wonder is often something people fear losing, but it actually becomes deeper. When you look at the stars and realize they are trillions of miles away, and that we are looking back in time, that is a profound experience. You don't need a deity to make the universe magnificent. In fact, the idea that all of this happened through the laws of physics and the passage of time is far more incredible than the idea that it was just willed into existence by a magic word. The mystery of existence is more beautiful when it remains a mystery that we are slowly solving together through science and observation. Leaving the concept of God behind also changes how we view our mistakes and our growth. When you believe an all-seeing eye is watching you, your motivations for being good are often tied to a sense of being monitored. When that eye is gone, you have to find a deeper, more authentic reason to be a good person. You find that you want to be kind because it feels good to help others and because it builds a better community for everyone. This is a much more stable foundation for character than fear. You become a person of integrity because you have decided that is who you want to be, not because you're trying to keep a clean record for a cosmic judge. Think about the way we handle grief. It is often said that religion provides comfort in the face of death, and for many it does. But there is a different, more grounded comfort in the truth. Knowing that a loved one is no longer suffering, and that their life's work and their impact on others are their true legacy, can be very healing. We don't need to tell stories about golden streets to value the time we had with someone. We honor them by carrying their memory forward and by living well ourselves. This honest approach to loss allows for a more genuine grieving process that isn't clouded by shoulds or musts from a religious authority. The concept of faith is often praised as a virtue, but in any other area of life, we see it as a risk. We wouldn't use faith to decide which medicine to give a child. We use evidence. Applying that same standard of evidence to our deepest beliefs is simply a matter of consistency. It isn't an attack on anyone. It's a commitment to the truth. When you stop prioritizing faith over facts, you find that your feet are on much more solid ground. You are no longer swayed by whoever has the most charismatic delivery or the most traditional authority. You become the judge of what is true, based on what can be demonstrated. Ultimately, finding yourself is about realizing that you are enough. You don't need a supernatural blessing to have value. You don't need a divine purpose to have a reason to get out of bed. You are a part of the universe that has become conscious and is now looking back at itself. You are the eyes, ears, and mind of the cosmos. That realization is more than enough to sustain a lifetime of exploration, love, and meaning. You are free to be who you are, to love who you want, and to think for yourself. The world is open, the path is yours to create, and there is so much to see. One of the most striking things you notice when you step away from a religious worldview is the sheer diversity of human thought that was previously hidden from you. When you are inside a faith, you are often taught to view other belief systems as either incomplete versions of your own or outright deceptions. But when you step outside, you realize that every culture in history has tried to solve the same puzzles of existence, morality, and purpose. You can see the beauty in the Buddhist focus on mindfulness, the Stoic commitment to resilience, and the secular humanist dedication to reason without needing to buy into a supernatural package. This global perspective makes you feel more connected to the human story as a whole. You are no longer a member of a small, exclusive club. You are a participant in a vast, ancient conversation about what it means to be alive. There is also a profound shift in how you perceive the natural world. In many religious traditions, nature is seen as a backdrop for the human drama, or a resource provided for our use. But without that hierarchy, you see that we are deeply and inextricably part of the ecosystem. We share DNA with every living thing on this planet, from the grass under our feet to the birds in the sky. This realization often leads to a much stronger sense of environmental responsibility. You don't protect the earth because it is a gift from a creator, but because it is our only home, and we are part of its living fabric. This biological connection provides a sense of belonging that is grounded in physical reality rather than spiritual abstraction, making your place in the world feel solid and real. Finally, leaving God behind allows you to reclaim your time and your mental energy. So much of a religious life is spent in performance, attending services, performing rituals, and worrying about whether your thoughts are pleasing to a higher power. When those requirements fall away, you gain an incredible amount of space to actually live. You can spend your Sundays in nature, your evenings in deep conversation with friends, and your mental energy on solving real-world problems. You find that the sacred isn't found in a specific building or a set of ancient words, but in the moments of genuine connection, the pursuit of truth, and the simple joy of being conscious. In the end, leaving God isn't about hate or anger. It's about honesty. It's about looking at the evidence or lack thereof and following where it leads, even if it's uncomfortable. It's about realizing that the voice you thought was a deity was often just your own intuition or your own conscience. And that's actually great news. It means you were the one with the strength and the wisdom all along. If you're feeling lost right now, just know that it's a natural part of the process. You're unlearning years of conditioning. Take your time. Read, think, observe, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. The world is a much bigger and more interesting place when you aren't trying to fit it into a box. You haven't lost your way. You've just stopped following a map that was drawn by people who didn't know the terrain. Now you get to explore it for yourself. You get to